The Vanishing Conductor, Alder Valley, Pennsylvania. A small town where the sound of train whistles is as familiar as church bells, and the grand brick station has stood for more than a century. The Alder Valley Railway is more than just transportation here. It's a living link to the past. Each weekend, tourists ride the restored steam engines along scenic mountain tracks that wind past farms, rivers, and the deep cut of Ridgeford Gorge. And for more than 20 years, no one wore the conductor's cap more proudly than Frank Dorsey. A conductor everyone knew. Frank was in his mid-50s in 1981, a tall man with a booming laugh, a tidy mustache, and a way of making every passenger feel like an old friend. Locals said he had a gift for remembering names, and for telling just the right story to pass the time between stations. But beneath his easygoing nature, Frank took his duties seriously. Schedules had to be kept. Safety came first. The overnight run on October 14, 1981, Frank was assigned to an overnight freight and passenger run from Alder Valley to Ridgeford. It wasn't unusual. He'd made the 42-mile trip dozens of times. The train would depart just after 9 p.m., pass through 3 small towns, and arrive in Ridgeford shortly before 2 a.m. that night. The weather was clear, the train on time, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The last sighting, the final confirmed sighting of Frank, was at 10:03 p.m. A passenger in the second car remembered him checking tickets, chatting briefly about the autumn foliage, and moving toward the rear of the train. After that, no one noticed his absence. Not the passengers, not the crew. Not until the train rolled into Ridgeford, and the platform stood empty where he should have been waiting to greet arrivals. A town in shock. When word spread the next morning, the reaction in Alder Valley was disbelief. Frank wasn't the kind of man to miss work, especially not to simply disappear in the middle of a route. The tracks were searched, stations along the way contacted, and nearby woods combed. There were no signs of a struggle, no misplaced belongings. Just one unanswered question. Where had the conductor gone? In the case of Frank Dorsey, time wasn't just important, it was everything. To understand how a man could vanish from a moving train, we have to retrace the journey minute by minute. The journey begins. The Alder Valley to Ridgeford overnight run was part freight, part passenger service. 2 passenger cars at the front, a baggage car in the middle, and several freight cars at the rear. Frank's role as conductor was to move through the passenger section, check tickets, and ensure that both passengers and cargo were accounted for. On the night of October 14, 1981, the train departed exactly on schedule. At 9:05 p.m., the first leg. The first leg of the trip, Alder Valley to Brookside, took just over an hour. Frank was seen multiple times. Once at 9:40 speaking with a young couple about the dining car menu, and again at 9:55 assisting a porter with a large piece of luggage. At 10:03 p.m., a passenger in car 2 saw him heading toward the back of the train, clipboard in hand. It would be the last confirmed sighting. The middle of the route, between Brookside and the next scheduled stop, Milford. The train passed through long stretches of unlit forest. There were no station platforms, no public crossings, just miles of track cutting through the trees. The engineer and firemen at the front had no reason to suspect anything unusual. Frank wasn't required to check in until Milford. Why no one noticed overnight runs were quiet. Most passengers dozed or read under the dim carriage lights. Crew members were spread out, attending to their duties in different parts of the train. It wasn't until the arrival in Ridgeford at 1:52 a.m. that Frank's absence became clear, when he didn't appear on the platform to help passengers disembark. The immediate search. The crew backtracked, searching every car from front to back. His conductor's cap and coat were hanging neatly in the staff closet. His ticket punch and clipboard were missing. The Ridgeford station master contacted Alder Valley by phone. Within hours, A search party was walking the tracks between Milford and Ridgeford, but the trail was cold before it began. When a search turns up nothing along the main line, investigators start asking a different question. Could the missing person have left the main line altogether? In Franklin Dorsey's case, that question led to one of the most puzzling discoveries in the Alder Valley Railway's history. The forgotten spur, 3 miles east of Milford, a narrow track split off from the main line. It curved into the woods, overgrown with weeds and saplings, before ending abruptly at a set of locked freight doors in a hillside. The spur had been officially closed since 1972. After the small limestone quarry it served shut down, the switch leading to it was supposed to be sealed, its lever locked in place. Yet in October of 1981, just days after Frank vanished, a maintenance worker found the lock missing. Why it stood out? The overnight run between Alder Valley and Ridgeford had no scheduled stops at the spur. The engineer swore he had never switched onto it. But the fact that the lock was gone meant one thing. Someone had accessed the spur recently. When investigators walked the length of the abandoned track, they noticed faint scuff marks on the gravel, as if something heavy had been dragged toward the hillside doors. Inside the freight house, the locked freight doors were eventually opened by railway officials. Inside was nothing but dust, old crates marked for the quarry, and the smell of damp stone. No sign of Frank, no sign of a struggle. But in a far corner, behind a stack of empty pallets, they found something odd, a fresh footprint in the dust, clearly made within the past few weeks. What it suggested, if Frank had somehow left the train onto the spur, he could have walked, or been taken, to the freight house. But the footprint raised more questions than answers. Whose was it? And why was anyone in the freight house after nearly a decade of abandonment? In every railroad office, there's one book that quietly tells the story of every mile of track, the maintenance log. Every inspection, every repair, and every unscheduled stop is supposed to be recorded there. In the Alder Valley Railway's case, those ledgers went back decades. But the one from 1981 had a page that changed the entire shape of the investigation. The missing entry in early 2022, a volunteer archivist named Linda Hargrove was organizing old railway documents for a local history display. Tucked between two 1982 logbooks was a thinner, leather-bound ledger marked Alder Valley Line minus 1981. As Linda flipped through, she noticed that the October 14th entry, the very night Frank disappeared, had a line written in different handwriting than the rest of the book. Spur switch engaged, 11:47 p.m., cleared at 12:12 I. Why this was critical? This was the first recorded evidence that the spur had been used on the night in question. Officially, the train should have been halfway to Ridgeford by that time, still on the main line. The notation didn't say who engaged the switch, only that it had been. And the cleared time matched almost exactly when the train arrived at the next checkpoint, after Milford. The second detail below the time entry, there was a short remark. Assist provided 1 passenger. The wording was strange. This was a freight and passenger mixed run, but assisting a passenger on a closed spur made no sense, unless that passenger was not part of the official manifest. A hidden page, at the very back of the ledger, Linda found a folded sheet wedged into the spine. It was a list of initials, with corresponding dates spanning late summer and early autumn of 1981. One of the dates matched October 14th. Next to it, the initials FD. Some memories fade with time. Others stay sharp, especially when they're tied to something you can't explain. For retired railway switchman Earl Hanley, October 14th, 1981, was one of those nights he could still picture as if it happened last week. The unexpected call Earl had been working at the small signal shack just west of Milford, where the abandoned spur branched off from the main line. It was a quiet post, most nights. No trains came through after 10 p.m., But just before midnight, he received a short radio call from a voice he didn't recognize. "Clear the spur. We're coming in light." The phrase "coming in light" usually meant a small engine or maintenance cart, not a full freight and passenger train. The strange arrival. Minutes later, Earl heard the low rumble of a locomotive approaching. To his surprise, it was the Alder Valley overnight run, the very train Frank was conducting. The train slowed and eased onto the spur, its cars disappearing into the shadow of the trees. Earl said he saw two figures climb down from one of the passenger cars. One was wearing a conductor's uniform. The other had on a light-colored coat. They walked toward the freight house at the end of the spur, and that was the last time Earl saw either of them. What happened next? About 20 minutes later, the train backed out from the spur and continued east toward Ridgeford. Frank wasn't among the crew when they passed Earl's shack. The man in the light coat was gone too. Why he stayed quiet when asked why he never reported this. Earl admitted that he assumed it was some kind of authorized transfer. He didn't know Frank personally and figured the railway management would handle any follow-up. It wasn't until years later, when he heard about the disappearance, that he realized what he'd seen might have been the last confirmed sighting of the missing conductor. For more than 40 years, Frank Dorsey's disappearance puzzled the people of Alder Valley. But with the rediscovery of the 1981 maintenance ledger and the long-withheld account of the retired switchman, a clearer picture began to form. The reconstructed night at 10:03 p.m., Frank was last seen heading toward the rear of the Alder Valley overnight run. Somewhere between Brookside and Milford, he met with an unknown passenger in a light-colored coat, someone not listed on the manifest. By 11:47 p.m., the train was diverted onto the long-abandoned spur, its switch unlocked and engaged. Two figures, Frank and the unknown passenger, were seen walking toward the freight house at the end of the spur. What happened at the freight house? The freight house itself revealed no conclusive evidence, but the fresh footprint, the ledger notation, assist provided, one passenger, and the initials FD, suggested Frank's presence was intentional, at least at the start. Whether he was helping the passenger retrieve something or delivering something himself remains uncertain. But when the train pulled out 20 minutes later, Frank was gone, and the spur switch was reset as if nothing had happened. Why the case went cold in 1981, with no witness coming forward about the spur, investigators focused their search entirely along the main line. The idea that Frank had left the train during the journey wasn't considered likely. Without the ledger entry or Earl Hanley's memory, there was no reason to suspect otherwise. The most likely truth. It now appears Frank may have left the train willingly to assist someone, perhaps a friend, perhaps a stranger in need, at the spur's freight house. Something during that meeting kept him from returning to the train. Whether it was an accident, a deliberate departure, or something more mysterious remains an open question. A legacy on the line. Today, Alder Valley Station has a small display dedicated to Frank Dorsey. It includes his cap, a photograph of him greeting passengers, and a brass plaque that reads, "A conductor's duty is to see every passenger safely home. May we someday see you safely home as well." The old spur remains locked, its rails rusted under a carpet of leaves. But for those who remember that October night, the sound of a midnight train still brings the same question. Where did the conductor go?